Welcome to the Social Mobility Talks podcast, brought to you by the Social Mobility Commission. Today's episode is hosted by me, Rob Wilson. I'm the Deputy Chair of the Social Mobility Commission. The SMC publishes research on social mobility, and we use this to provide advice to the government. We also work to promote social mobility ourselves by collaborating with and challenging employers, professionals, universities, schools, families, and other organisations to play their part. I'm Rob Wilson, and my background is in growing small and medium-sized businesses, particularly in areas of technology and innovation. But I also have a 12-year interlude serving as an MP and a minister in government. But that's another life and probably for another podcast. Although it was education and social mobility that remained of huge interest to me throughout my time in Parliament, and that's partly because I came from a very disadvantaged background myself, and I felt a duty to deliver the opportunities I have to other people. And that's one of the reasons why I founded two schools in Reading when I was the MP there. Now, today I'm joined by Barry Smith, an educationalist and founding deputy of the successful Michaela Free School in Wembley. So, Barry, would you like to introduce yourself?
Right then, so I'm Barry Smith. What did I start teaching? I started teaching in 1997. I was 29 at the time. So I'd had a bit of a life before teaching and started off in South Wales. Then I went into consultancy work for about 10 years. So teaching teachers how to teach, traveling the country doing that. I remember seeing Catherine Birbal sing on the television, 2010, saying, "Schools are broken, what are we going to do?" And drinking a glass of wine and going, "That woman's right." And 4 years later, I ended up working with her and one of the founders of Michaela. So we would meet at weekends with a gentleman called Joe Kirby, and we'd do all the planning for the Fix the School or ideas, what we want the school to be. And then in September 14, we started that. I was there for 3 years. Then I became the head of Great Yarmouth Charter, which was an inadequate school in Great Yarmouth. It had been inadequate according to Ofsted for 10 years. Sort of 22 out of 30 kids were leaving without a basic pass in maths and English. It was in a bad way. We turned it around very, very quickly. GCSE results at 5+ in English and maths doubled in a year. Ofsted described it as a miraculous turnaround. And it was just a gorgeous place to work. And I just spent today at Michaela, and we had a lot of parallels with Michaela there. It was just a joy to be there. The relationships with the kids and the teachers, it was just lovely. And so we did that, and then I came back to London, and then I worked with the fifth ed in 5 years at Hackney Youth School, and we turned that round in terms of behaviour. And then apparently this summer, and I left there August 21, and this summer I believe that Hackney Youth School has got the highest progress rate for any school with 60% plus free school meals. So they've done incredibly well as well. Same foundations, a lot of parallels between what we did at Michaela, what we did at Hackney New School in terms of the behaviour, and what we did at Charter in Yarmouth.
So, Barry, masses of experience, and I think we're going to drill into that quite a lot as we go through today. But we're going to discuss it in the context of US charter schools and what we can read across from them to the UK and to the sort of free school and academy movement. For example, as you mentioned in your introduction, we recently saw the top Progress 8 schools were very much part of this free school movement, which allows much more independence to those schools. But just to give you and our listeners some background, US charter schools have been a topic of significant debate, I suppose, since their introduction in the 1990s. And they're schools that are publicly funded but privately managed, much like free schools are, and were set up to offer more, although some would argue better, schooling options, particularly promoting high-quality teaching and learning. And there are different types of charter schools. Some, for example, focus on STEM subjects, and others focus on the arts, things like music and so forth. But there are also these things called no excuses charter schools, which I'd like to focus in on a bit more today than the sort of more general charter movement. And they tend to centre their educational philosophy around the intolerance of any form of failure. There's not really a solid foundation of what makes a school a no excuses charter school, but most believe in high behavioural expectations, proper parental involvement in the school, and a relentless focus on academic achievement of all students, irrespective of their background and where they've come from. Now, these schools are most commonly found in, I'd say, urban areas of the US, and they've been shown to be particularly effective when serving children from low-income families and ethnically diverse areas and backgrounds. So that sort of set the scene, Barry. You were the deputy head of Michaela School in Wembley when it launched. Was any of this known to you at the time? Did any of this play a part in your thinking?
Well, certainly the term "no excuses" was used. It's not a helpful term. People will deliberately misinterpret the term. It sounds very harsh. Certainly Michaela was built upon, and then with the work I did in subsequent schools, is built upon the... What do I always talk about when I work with schools now? I work with head teachers now. I always say, are the children as polite to you as you are to them? If they're not, there's a problem. Are you being extra polite to model that, to model what courtesy looks like? So that's what Michaela was about. It was about showing kids, well, okay, you have personal responsibility, you have agency. That's what we did at other schools I worked in too. So you arrive on time, you do attend, you work with your teachers, not against your teachers. These are quite old-fashioned values, but that doesn't make them bad. That makes them... We're socializing kids. We're deliberately socializing kids. We're deliberately creating an esprit de corps. I always talk about schools. You've got hundreds of kids. You may have 100 plus staff, and it needs to be e pluribus unum. You need to make one out of the many. There needs to be a cohesion. You need to row together. And the clarity of expectation. A lot of schools don't have clarity of expectation. So if you're doing something different, like a Michaela, like Charter, if you Google me, God, I'm a devil, right? But what we were actually advocating, what I still advocate is, I talk about a genuine mutual respect culture. I talk about having a culture of conspicuous courtesy. I'm extra polite to you, you're extra polite to me. I never ignore you, you never ignore me. That's what we've done, the work that I've done in this country with people like Catherine, and certainly what I've read about charter schools in the US. No excuse. I haven't visited any of those schools, so I can't comment upon them in depth. But I think the term itself has been weaponized against schools.
Okay, so you knew of them, but you didn't really draw much from their experience because you didn't really know.
Me personally, no. But Catherine would have certainly done some research on that. There were other members of the team that would have known a bit about it. I think you mentioned King Solomon School, didn't you, earlier? That was an inspiration. Dixon's up in the north, that was a bit of an inspiration. So ideas were taken from those schools. And yeah, they were schools that were thinking, but tell you what, we need to up our game in terms of clarity of culture. I'd call it clarity of culture because I'm wary. In a way, I'm dancing around trying to avoid terms like no excuses. I just think it's such a damaging term because people will weaponize that against schools. I work with lots of heads, and lots of heads are very, very frightened of raising expectations.
And we will come to that later because some of the critics in America have taken an approach not dissimilar from that about the No Excuses title anyway. But what I'd like to sort of, just to draw this bit of the conversation to a close, is talk about whether there was a wider influence that you can perceive of those charter schools to the free school movement in the UK. Do you think there was any read across? Because obviously they were first and the free schools came later.
Well, there would have been in some quarters. Me personally, when we set up Michaela, my perspective was, well, look, Michaela was just a bigger version of the classroom I'd always ran. I believed in being very polite to children very polite to me. Every second counts. I'm an adult. I'm an authority figure. I'm not going to make you guess. I'm a subject expert. I'm going to pour that knowledge into your head. You're going to remember stuff. I'm going to make stuff memorable. You're going to leave my lesson thinking, oh, I'm a French teacher. So you're going to leave my lesson going, I'm good at French. Then you arrive next lesson feeling accomplished. That's what I believe in. That's why we set up a school like Michaela. That's why we transformed charter in Yarmouth and Hackney New School and other schools across the country that I work with. That's the aim, to make it a school where kids know, oh, I'm better than I thought I was.
Yeah. So you've got real expertise in turning around failing schools, as they're termed. But let's just for a second focus in on the no excuses element of these charter schools. While a typical charter school isn't any more effective at increasing test scores than a typical public state school in the US. There is evidence to suggest, and we would say quite strong evidence, that these no excuses type of charter schools are much more effective. So they have been shown to yield very strong academic results, particularly in maths and literacy, and particularly for disadvantaged students in urban areas. Now, I would say that surely must be of interest to everybody in education, as it's about schools making a real difference in very challenging areas and environments. So this description that I've just given has very strong similarities with the things that you've been doing in the UK, in Hackney, at Great Yarmouth. So how do you go about making that sort of difference in all these different types of areas and all these different types of schools?
I think you need very clear values. The head needs to have very clear values. I worry that a lot of the time heads don't have very clear values. And then you need to over-communicate those values and be unapologetic about those values. Now, a lot of people, who was the most criticised? Who was the most successful head teacher in the country? Catherine Birbal-Singh, arguably. Okay, you need a very clear vision. When you're walking around school, what do you want to see? What do you want to hear? That's what a truly impressive head teacher, in my estimation, that's what they bring to a school. They're not trying to second guess. They're not trying to be with the zeitgeist. They're thinking, wait a minute, where are my values? It should be very values-led, a very successful school.
So let's you mentioned criticism, so let's talk about the critics of these schools, and let's look to the US first, and you can bring it back to the UK. I mean, in the US, they are concerned that some of these, particularly no excuses charter schools, overemphasize the academics and the strict disciplinary approach, and some of them have got quite a lot of criticism for doing that. And some researchers suggest that some of these schools could be detrimental to students for the sort of socio-emotional growth and well-being of those students, and particularly with regard to SEND students, special educational needs students. Now, they say that that students considered difficult are often off-rolled in the interest of the school rather than the interest of the actual student, which is also suggested about similar schools in the UK. And it's something that I'd like to sort of put to you, because critics also suggest that it's all about money as well, and all about funding. And, you know, some of these no excuse schools get extra money, get from philanthropists and so forth. Do any of these criticisms resonate with your experience here in the UK context, and how would you answer them?
Personal experience, it's incredible. You know, we have a recruitment crisis in education. We have a recruitment crisis on a teacher level and on a senior leadership level. It's hardly surprising, because teachers and head teachers are pilloried endlessly. There are progressive activists who are very, 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 very vehemently against adult authority. And I'm not talking about bullying children in any way, shape or form, but in some quarters, and some very vociferous detractors will, for example, there was something on Twitter the other day. A senior leader at a trust had taken a picture of kids walking in single file in the corridor, and all hell broke loose on edgy Twitter, because that's seen as oppressive. These are tight corridors. You have to go. Today, Michaela, the corridors are so narrow. You've got hundreds of people trying to move around. That's not oppressive. This is, you walk on the left, you're polite to people, you give way at the top. Just like if you were driving along a road, we have to be considerate of others. That's what I advocate. And when we look at, I keep going back to, are the children as polite to you as we are to them? So, for example, I taught us kids about steps. We always say sir, miss. If I don't know your name, I call you sir, miss, partially because I forget your name, but also I'm extra polite. I'm expecting you to say sir, miss. It's kind of our full stop. People will object to that. You expect children to call you sir? I say steps. Thank you, excuse me, please. Well, I'm going to say it to you, you're going to say it to me. Your mum and dad have taught you that. And sometimes you do it at home, but you forget it. When you're with your peer group and your friends, you think, nah, I don't want to do that, it's not very cool. But I'm going to go, no, it's really, really important. The final lesson steps is, it's our style. So you can tell from our facial expression, our tone of voice, our body language, We're warm and we're welcoming, we're friendly. We're socializing kids. We're teaching kids to be nice to each other. That isn't strict. We've used the word strict, we've used the word discipline, though we've used the term no excuses. They're all terms that are often weaponized against head teachers. It's incredibly difficult to, for example, permanently exclude a child. But there are always accusations. What do they talk about? The school to prison pipeline. Somebody who's really good, who you should talk to, is a gentleman called, on Twitter, he's called Old Andrew, and he really looks into all the data on this, and he's very, 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 very good. There isn't evidence for a lot of the stuff that schools are accused of doing.
So you would argue that the accusations in the UK, let's focus on the UK for now, that these schools are like Michaela and ARC schools and others of the type, off-rolling isn't really something that happens.
It's not an experience I've seen. Right? It really isn't. Again, I'm thinking of who's going to be the new head of Ofsted. Lovely bloke, really nice bloke. He was the chief exec of OGAT, a trust that takes on incredibly difficult schools in incredibly difficult circumstances. But as soon as you hold the line, you get criticism.
In the US, some of these schools, a small number, there is evidence that they have moved beyond the sort of high levels of discipline into something slightly more sinister. And I mean, do you think that is something that could potentially happen?
There's always the potential. Look, it's an organisation of maybe 1,500 kids, maybe more. Schools are too big. That's just too big for a school. You have maybe 100 staff. You have maybe a very large senior leadership team. You need a really strong head who knows what's going on in their school, who then knows how to train their staff incredibly well. You're working with lots of young, impressionable teachers sometimes. So I always talk about, I work with a lot of head teachers and I'm trying to get them to change the cultures of their school. And there'll always be a continuum. So there'll be some teachers that are incredibly slack, incredibly lax, and they'll allow children to be children bully adults in school. It's a serious issue. And at one end, some teachers will allow that to happen. At the other end, there'll be some teachers, if there is a even semi-efficient behaviour sanction system, at the other end of the spectrum, there'll be teachers who are really trigger happy. Sometimes teachers are quite frosty and cold and not great at building relationships with children because the teachers are quite scared of the children.
Well, I mean, that leads me on to quite nicely to something else that I'd like to turn to. The sort of things that the UK could really learn from these charter schools. And just to remind you again, there is this striking evidence that the US charter schools do yield very positive results in terms of educational attainment. So that is indisputable. But they don't seem to seamlessly sort of translate into the UK context. So, as nothing ever does really, because you can't just lift something and put it down in another country. But there are some very interesting sort of characteristics and lessons that we might learn. And I'd like to get your thoughts on three particular areas. And the first one is really orderly classrooms. Obviously, everybody I think would agree that chaotic classrooms make learning and teaching wherever they're located very, very difficult, whether in the US or the UK. And in these US charter schools, there doesn't seem to be any single model or disciplinary practice within these schools. Some concentrate on the small things, some concentrate on much bigger disciplinary issues. So we haven't got any evaluations that really drill down and distinguish between those two things. So we actually, at the moment, don't know what's making the difference. So it'd be interesting to get your take in the UK. What are the disciplinary things that you can concentrate on and make a real difference within schools, in your experience?
You've got to, again, it's very unfashionable to say it, and you can be attacked for saying it. There has to be an acceptance that there is a hierarchy. That I'm your teacher, I'm the boss. I'm a very nice boss. I'm not perfect, but I'm your boss. And your job, this is a place of work, and I'm doing a job, and your children, and you're doing a job, and I'm going to give you instructions, and you're going to follow instructions. There you go. Don't fight us. We're not, a phrase I use a lot when I'm talking to kids. Look, don't fight us. We're not the enemy. We're not the enemy. Whereas in so many schools, there's a them and us culture. And successful schools break down that culture. You break down that culture not by saying, hey, this is a democracy. You break down that culture by going, it's quite clear. There's a pyramid. It's hierarchy. I'm the adult. I'm the boss. I'm going to tell you what to do. And I'm going to teach you really, really well because I know my subject really well. This is how we start lessons. This is how we end lessons. This is how we make every single second count. So we do sweat the small stuff. We do look at the minutiae because you might be working with 100 members of staff, 100 teachers. Again, e pluribus unum. You have to have that unity amongst the staff. And schools don't train their teachers very well. And the teacher training you get so you get the badge to say you're a teacher isn't great. And then once you get those teachers into your school, you have to make them yours in your house style, in your image. So I'll say, it should be obvious you're a Michaela teacher. It should be obvious you're a charter teacher, whatever the name of the school is. Now, I'm not saying lose your personality. I'm not saying lose autonomy. Your autonomy you were employed to be a really good French teacher, history teacher, art teacher. So where I want your brain power, your concentration to go is, kids in year 7 keep getting this wrong. The kids in year 9 keep getting this wrong in my subject. Why is that then? You focus on your subject expertise. And as a senior leader, as the senior team, as the head, now these are the overarching principles. This is how we all work. This is how we row together. This is how we have cohesion in the school. So the school is incredibly predictable. Who gains from having a predictable school? Well, every single member of staff. Your strong teachers may think, well, I don't need to fit in with them all because, I'm charismatic. I've got the kids eating out the palm of my hand. Yeah, but I need you to. I need you to work with us. I need us all to roll together because you might be incredibly charismatic. Then the kid goes to the next teacher. The teacher may not have your skill level. But if we're all using similar methodology, similar script, there's a cohesion and a little bit of your charisma, your stardust, that's trickling down. So there's a similarity between us all. There are overarching principles that we all apply within the school. And that's what kids need. All kids will benefit from that. All teachers benefit from that. The most vulnerable kids will benefit from that most. There isn't, what does this teacher expect? There's, but in this school, we always start like this. We always end like that. We always hand our books like that. So much is just the logistics of moving hundreds and hundreds of people around on the hour, every hour. Get that right. And as a teacher, subject teacher, all you have to really think about is, how can I be the best possible English, maths, science teacher that I can be?
So let me put this to you, because it shouldn't be really something that's up for debate, I wouldn't have thought. But, I don't work every day in education, because the evidence points to the fact that if you have orderly classrooms, you have better results. Now, that's in the US, and I would have thought that's also the case in the UK. So let me put this to you. If schools in general make discipline a high priority by embedding practices of self-control, self-reliance, self-esteem, and anchoring them in achievement, which is what the charter school movement does, what would you say to that? Is that an approach that could be used in the UK?
Well, a lot of schools will say they do that, but a lot of schools, there's a huge PR movement in the education system. If you look at education Twitter, there's a lot of schools purporting to be something they're not. We are constantly questioning ourselves as school leaders. Will Ofsted like this? Is the biggest question. Remember, there will always be in every school, there will be some very vociferous, very difficult parents that will love a Facebook group, okay? And they will love to attack the head, especially if the head is trying to change a school culture that for a long time has been in decline, hasn't been serving the teachers or the kids well. So if you come in and you say, listen, we've got to get a grip of this. We've got to get a grip of discipline. Even the word discipline, people are uncomfortable using. So the head teacher tries to change the culture of the school. The head teacher will be attacked. Parents, instead of following the normal chain of command to make complaints, they will go straight to the press. Head teachers are frightened of that. They don't want that negative press coverage. Parents will go straight to Ofsted. There's always the possibility of a no. Listen, when I was a charter, 5 months in, we had a no-notice inspection because there'd been so much said about us. So 8 o'clock one morning, the inspectors say, we're on your doorstep, we're coming in now. I loved it. I mean, they left after a day and said, I think I've probably said before, because I say it all the time, I'm broken record. They described the school as a miraculous turnaround. But I didn't need them to tell me that. I knew when we had cameras on the doorstep, when we had press writing dreadful things about us, I knew what was happening inside the school. I knew that was a school where we were saving those kids and saving the staff. If you read an article about what we did at Charter from Times Z back in the day, and it said, what did it say? Oh, the most controversial school in Britain. Controversial because, no, I'm not going to back.
So let's move on to that very topic, because the second of the three things that charter schools focus on is supporting pupil achievement. And the evidence that suggests that they have 5 particular practices that they follow. And you can respond to this when I've sort of set them out. The first one is frequent teacher to student feedback. Secondly, data-driven instruction. And what I mean by that is targeting an area for improvement that's been identified through testing in particular. Thirdly, regular high-quality tutoring. Increased instructional time is the fourth one. And finally, always having high expectations of the students. Now, those I would have thought are 5 good practices that any good school would want to focus on and would add to the effectiveness of the school. I mean, it just seems like common sense to an extent to me. But the question is, if you don't use these well-proven methods, can you get the same or better results by doing something else?
Listen, I've only been doing this in 1997. What do I know? No. I think there's a danger with being data-driven. I think there's a real danger with that. And there's a real danger that senior teams think, well, look, I can sit in my office and it's really quite calm and I can make nice tables and pretty pie charts and I can show them to Ofsted. There's a real danger in that.
But data-driven instruction is slightly different. That is, if a
an analysis of where kids are failing,
or tested and they're weak on something.
If it's done well, it has potential. But let's not let the tail wag the dog. But let's think very carefully about what really good quality teaching looks like, and that's why I go back to this is our teaching style. These are things that we will do in this school. These are things we won't. Yeah, but at my last school I did this and I really liked it. Well, okay, but if you want to work here, we don't like that, so you won't be doing it here. But what about my professional autonomy? That's okay, you can work somewhere else. But these are the strategies that we believe in. Come here, we will teach you to be the kind of teacher we want. Now that might work for you, not work for you. It's a free market, you can go somewhere else. But I need cohesion in the teaching. I need to use, the head needs to decide what are the most valid, most useful, most bang for your buck strategies in a classroom. And these are the strategies we use, and these are the strategies we don't use. There is an aversion to that. Some people think, no, I want to be creative in the way I teach. I think a head teacher needs to say, no, actually, this is what I believe in. This is the culture of the school, and this is the predictable nature of our teaching. Predictable isn't boring. Predictable is about kids knowing from lesson to lesson, yeah, I know that every second counts. No teacher in this school wastes my time. You would remember as a child yourself, we all did. There were teachers you worked hard for, teachers you didn't. I was talking to kids at lunch today, and I'm a French teacher. So why did you become a French teacher, sir? Oh, well, when I think about it, my my teacher that I knew I had to really focus in his lesson was Mr. Rowland. We called him Caesar. And he made us work really hard. And when he gave us praise, we knew we'd earned it. And that's why I became a French teacher, because every lesson I knew that I was becoming better. And that's what I want lessons to be. And that's what I think really good individual teachers give. But I don't want teachers to be individuals in silos. I want there to be that cohesion again.
And I think what you're reflecting there is something that they push very hard at King Solomon Academy, because they have a very similar set of things that they adhere to in the same way as charter schools have those 5 things. And they have a 6th thing, which is always learning, which is really what you're saying there, constantly improving, constantly learning.
Don't know King Solomon very well. I visited back in 2014 because they were a school that inspired us, because they had very good results. They were very different. I think we've got to be careful with soundbite mantra. There's a lot of it about. There's a lot of it about in education. I'm not suggesting for a second that's the case with King Solomon. I don't know the school well enough. But just be careful with fashionable soundbites. There's an awful lot of it in education. Okay. For example, there's stuff that standard practice is something we call line-ups. In the yard, you blow a whistle and everybody lines up and they go into lessons. A lot of schools will do that. And they say, yeah, we do line-ups. And they say that as if, well, that's evidence that we're a very slick operation and we got great discipline. A lot of schools do that really, really badly. Some schools will do what they call family lunch. There's a bit of a seating plan, the kids talk together, there's a theme for the day. But a lot of schools try that and do it incredibly badly. So just be careful with, there's an attraction towards window dressing in education. When people visit, I'm not a big fan of school visits generally, because I think people don't appreciate what they're seeing. And so they, that carpet, that corridor, there's a line down the middle of the corridor. If I had that carpet, I think I'd have really good progress aid. That's not the answer. The carpet isn't the progress aid. That school says slant. I like that acronym. No, the acronyms aren't the answer. The values that underpin every single interaction, that's the answer.
And so let's move on then, because that's all very clear. The third part of what these schools focus on is accountability. And they seem, well, a bit like the free schools movement. They have their own budgets. They implement and design their own curriculum. They hire and train the teachers that they bring into the schools. Now, that is very much like the free school movement. Where do you think the free schools need more power and influence? Are there things that they could be devolved that they haven't got at the moment? Are there things that they need to continually improve that the government could hand over to them?
Listen, I don't know about how much power they actually have. What I know is there are a handful of very good head teachers. Why aren't we looking at those very, very good head teachers and going, what are they getting so right? Let's learn from the very best. Each school will have similarities and differences, but let's learn from the very best head. Whatever rights they have, whatever rights they currently have, they are using them very, very, very well. Let's learn from them. Now, again, a bit of an obsession with mine. What is one of the things that Michaela does very, very well? They focus on the daily experience of the kid, the daily experience of the teacher, what happens in the classroom. They're not talking about data endlessly. They're not talking about Ofsted endlessly. They're thinking, what do I want? What would I want for a child of my own? And that is what head teachers should be thinking about. Not, I tell you what, do you think, should this be on my Twitter feed? Would this go down well with my peer group? Would this go down well with groupthink? Would this go down well with parents even? Let's not try and appease other groups. Let's think, what do I believe a really, really great school should be?
I can imagine the Twitter reaction to those comments when they go out, which is exactly what you're referring to.
But that's why people are very, very afraid. Now, I'm not saying that parents shouldn't have an opinion. I did a podcast myself recently saying, look, I do think more parents should be more involved in their schools. I think in their children's schools. I think more parents should be complaining. But they should be complaining about the fact that their children aren't receiving a very good education. Not, well, you know, that school, they complained about the shoes. It's not right. They complained about the haircut. That's not right. Parents should be supporting their schools, their children's school, on those superficial things that the charter schools in the States make a big fuss on. And it's not yet the colour of your socks that's important. It's not your hairstyle that's important. It's the fact that you're willing to bend yourself to become part of the team. We're rowing together. That's what those signs are. So I think, yes, there are, 89% of schools, did we say good or better? But they're not. They're not. Ofsted are not doing their job properly when they say that. It's a complete misnomer. So parents should be complaining more the fact that the quality of education the children often receive isn't good.
But, I mean, I think you'd agree that schools should be fully accountable for everything that they do to Ofsted and others.
Well, they should be fully accountable, or Ofsted,
and to parents, and also to the students.
I think schools should be transparent.
Yeah.
I think doors should be open. I think you should be saying, come in, see what we're doing. Now, you may not like what we're doing, but it can't be a democracy It can't. You can't make the most difficult parent. You've got a cohort of, I don't know, maybe you've got 1,500 kids. You can't make your most difficult and belligerent, in some cases, parents. You can't make them de facto SLT that they're going to decide school policy.
Okay, so we've had a good discussion, and in the last 10 minutes that we've got left, I'd like to see if we can reach some broad conclusions that we can agree the evidence supports. So the first one is about the robust evidence that No Excuses charter schools yield strong academic results, particularly in urban areas. And this appears to be the case in the UK with certain types of school using similar practices. Would you agree with that statement?
I still don't like the term no excuses.
Okay.
If you're saying, you tell you what, schools that know exactly what they want, and they're precise and concise in their delivery, and they're predictable, and they've got a setup whereby the children understand there's a hierarchy, and the adults understand how to teach well, and the adults understand building relationships is key, but the foundation of the key is, well, ultimately, I'm your boss. I'll often say when I'm talking to kids, and I'll make reference to the head teacher and say, well, now, you see, Mr. Jones, head teacher, do you think he likes every aspect of his job? He doesn't, but he has to do it anyway. Or sometimes Mr. Jones and I might be in a meeting, and Mr. Jones might be thinking, oh, Mr. Smith, you're talking rubbish. I might be thinking the same about Mr. Jones, but I'm still super polite to him in my facial expression, tone of voice, body language. So it's all of that, those schools that socialise children to be polite to one another. That's key, and that's what I think is the common ingredient that binds the best schools I've seen.
Do you think that the sort of principles, though, that those sorts of US schools adhere to would work in all different types of areas? So, obviously they've been well documented in urban areas, but in areas such as rural areas, and you've worked in coastal areas, would those same sort of principles that those schools adhere to work in those sort of environments?
How strong is the head teacher? How convinced is the head teacher? How willing is the head teacher to go with what they believe when they will be attacked? Now, if you go, okay, I want to be all things to all people, I want to please all people all the time, but you can't. You can't do that. So the head teacher is employed because somebody thinks that they have what it takes to make this school something much better than it is. So you can't employ somebody to do the job and then put them in a straitjacket. So, listen, I've worked in rural schools, I've worked with schools all over the country, I've worked with schools in the northwest, and in coastal schools. It goes on and on and on. Look, kids aren't very different. Adults aren't very different. It is about the psychology of that group and how you create cohesion. And it is about ideally, yes, you do. What do I advocate all the time? Do podcasts for parents. Parents don't read policies. Parents don't understand the policies. They're not well written.
Nor do the politicians generally.
Well, there you go. But that's not decrying the parent. That's saying, look, this is documentation that it's a bit nebulous. And what do you really mean? And it's written in a language that you can't relate to. So I say head teachers should be doing podcasts to parents saying, listen, these are some things that are a bit contentious. Now, when your kid comes home and says, oh, they make us fold their arms every day, actually what we're doing is this. Or when your kid comes home and says, what about this and what? The real picture is this. Come in, let me show you what this school's all about. We're on a journey, we're improving, but let me show you.
So I think that you would, in general, agree, and I need some short answers now because we're getting to the end of the podcast.
I'm the wrong interviewee.
But those 5 principles about frequent teacher feedback, data-driven, regular, high-quality tutoring, and all that stuff I mentioned earlier, you would agree that all schools would benefit from that sort of approach?
They're headlines.
Yeah.
You'd have to delve deep in how you're going to apply those headlines.
Okay, that's a fair answer. And you would agree that schools benefit from greater freedom with the curriculum and with finances and the stuff?
Potentially, if you've got a really good head teacher.
I mean, throughout the conversation, you have constantly brought it back to the head teacher and the quality of teaching and the quality of the training of the teachers. So that seems to be your number one priority.
100%. Every school I work with, if the head doesn't get it, if the head doesn't have his values, if the head isn't creating a culture whereby those values are inculcated, and keep saying it in every single interaction, that's what makes a culture of a school. And if you're laissez-faire about it, today, Michaela, endless merits, endless acknowledgement when kids did the right thing. Kids did the wrong thing, oh, demerit. And the kid went, okay. They knew. And so the kids were kept on the straight and narrow. And everybody knew exactly what that roadmap was. It's too vague in so many schools. What is the right thing to do when there's so much in 6 different lessons a day? There's so much division. There's just that lack of clarity. We need clarity. We need predictability.
Well, look, Barry, there's so much we could discuss, but we're going to have to end today's podcast there, I think. So thank you very much indeed for your time and for all the knowledge that you've brought to today's podcast and to the little debate we've had. Please join us for further episodes of this Social Mobility Talks podcast, where we will be joined by a range of knowledgeable guests to discuss other issues which are crucial to social mobility. Thank you for listening.